So thank you for the invitation. I always love coming to this event and looking at folks that are interested in becoming better gardeners. So thanks, Mark, for that invitation. Do you have your seatbelts on? I have 30 minutes to talk about 3 gardening tasks that probably would require 3 years to teach. So this is, I'm giving you just a taste. Have you ever been to a tasting? What happens when you go to a wine tasting? Right? You buy cases of wine afterwards, okay? And it's interesting, today I'll be talking about planting, pruning, and pest management, and then come September 11th, here's this class both on Zoom and face-to-face called P Squared, Planting and Pruning. And so if you like what you taste, this is I'm totally shameless. Sign up for that class because we'd love to have you there. We have a great time. So with that, put on your seatbelts. I also want to thank Leaf and Limb for sponsoring this. What a great company. And they would probably tell you this, but I'm teaching a sustainable gardening class right now here at the Arboretum. And I just read this, and this is really cool. Did you know that 2 trees produce 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide, sequester 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide over the life of those trees, 2 trees. Does anybody know what the American carbon footprint is on average? You should. It's 20 metric tons in a lifetime. So you do the math. How many trees do you need to plant in your lifetime to zero out your carbon footprint? Lots. That's the right answer. Lots. 40 trees. 40 trees. So when I read that, I got all excited, guys, because I've planted like 90 trees, right? Not to mention all the shrubs and the perennials and all that kind of thing. So anyway, guys, the bottom line is plant trees. You'll start to diminish your carbon footprint, which is really important. So plant parenthood, don't you like that? From planting to pruning to pest management. If I can get through all 3 in 30 minutes, it will be miraculous. And then Ashley's going to get up and talk about soils in 30 minutes, which is even more of a challenge than what I have. So anyway, welcome. Thank you. Planting. What is the secret to successful planting? People always ask me, how big should the hole be? What is it about that question? Everybody's preoccupied with the hole. And then when can you plant and when is the best time to plant? Those are always common questions. Perhaps you have those questions. They're not wrong questions. They're good questions to ask. But I have the secret. Would you like to know what the secret to successful planting is? Here it is. Green side up. All right? That is the secret. All too many times people plant their plants like this. And that is a guarantee of failure right there, okay? So please, first in your notes, if you don't learn anything else from today's 30-minute presentation, put green side up, and you will be successful. All right, I want to jump right in. You got to give plants a good start, everybody. It's so important to give plants a good start, and the hole becomes this very important thing that people always ask about. How big should the hole be? And all I can tell you is the bigger the hole, the better. The bigger the hole, the better. But I want to go one step further. I've been on a campaign for the past 20 years to get people away from thinking about the hole. I want people to think about the hole. And now I have folks at home, now I have a group of 120 plus people looking at me very confused. Stop thinking about the hole, start thinking about the whole. The W-H-O-L-E. Okay? We know that we live in a place where much topsoil gets taken away before we move into that home. And what we're left with is something you'll learn probably from Ashley, something called subsoil. Guess what doesn't grow in subsoil? Typically, absorbing roots of plants. What kinds of plants are successful in the garden? Plants that have lots of absorbing roots. Make sense? Oh, we could talk about absorbing roots and how to maximize those, but that's not what I was asked to talk about. So stop thinking about the whole, start thinking about the whole. Instead of this kind on the left, instead of this kind of a perspective, start thinking this kind of a perspective. Yeah, but Bryce, what that means is I have to rethink the way I design my landscapes. Exactly. We need to have a cultural revolution when it comes to planting. We need to start thinking about planting beds, prepping those beds, and then planting in those beds, and not worry about planting in the hole. So if you think I'm going to tell you how big the hole should be, I'm not. You'll have to come to the class on September 11th to find out about that. Okay, I'm shameless, I really am. So look at these ideas. These are just examples of where they weren't thinking about the hole. The entire bed was prepped. And so having an entire bed that's prepped and root establishment and newly planted trees and shrubs can happen quickly, can happen more quickly, all right? This has got to stop. Stop digging a hole in a lawn. And of course, we could spend a whole nother hour talking about why lawns are evil. But anyway, stop digging a hole in the lawn and then plopping the tree down in that hole. This needs to stop. Look how far away those two trees are. Would it make sense perhaps to create a bed, prep that bed, and get as much turf away? Bartlett tree, sorry, leaf and limb. Bartlett tree did some research years ago and said that you get 90% more absorbing root growth in your trees if they grow under mulch versus turf. Think about that. How many of you want 90% more root growth in your trees? Okay, then get rid of your turf. Oh, I didn't mean to sound so like a parent. But anyway, so guys, you can start thinking about, turf's not evil, right? But start thinking about not having it predominate the landscape and create plant beds where once they're prepped, then it's very easy. You don't have to think about the hole. You just dig a hole and put the plant in it. You don't have to worry about how big it is relative to that soil, okay? And then one thing I learned a long time ago, about 25, maybe even 30 years ago, I was at a conference where a tree company talked about how important it is to expose that root collar. That's called the root collar. All right, and then they showed slides like this one, right? Not only did the burlap not get removed, but the collar is completely buried. And this spells death over time. This spells death over time. We need to expose that root collar whenever we plant anything, okay? We also don't want to plant a pimple where we plant it so high, because that's not going to do any good either. We just want to make sure. And when I went to that conference, I drove home that night, put on my headlamp, went outside in the dark, and started moving mulch away from all the base of my trees to expose that, because I was feeling very guilty. All right? The importance of establishment, okay? Guys, if you don't learn anything today except this, then it will have been a success. And that is the concept of establishment. When we read books, we get online and we read about plants that are drought tolerant, plants that are pest tolerant, all these types of things. We often don't see native plants are better because they tolerate drought, all those. You have to put this little caveat in there, once established. Okay, once established, when you plant a plant, I don't care what kind of plant it is, it has to go through an establishment time. How many of you are new to the area within the last 6 months? Okay, you're still getting established. You still need help, right? Right? It's the same with the plants that we plant in the ground. They need establishment time. Look what it says. Newly planted trees and shrubs are considered established when their root spread equals the spread of the above ground canopy. Okay, that's called the drip line. See this tree here? So that says that this tree will become fully established when the roots spread to either side of the drip line. Guess what? That takes time. And it's not 3 weeks or a month. Okay, number one killer of newly planted trees and shrubs, water loss. All right, so if you think all I need to do is water it for 3 weeks, have a nice day. That tree is going to start failing if you do not maintain that. So look at the establishment time ranges from 2 weeks for annuals to 4 months, okay, for some perennials, to 2 years for trees and shrubs. An establishment time for a tree that might be 8 feet tall that you put in your landscape may take as much as 2 years before the roots have spread to equal the drip line. So we need to have that kind of mindset when we're planting. Those things provide more success than how big should the hole be or what do we put in the hole. Now, the establishment, we can tweak the establishment. Look at this, time of year that we plant is going to influence how long it takes. Post-plant irrigation, watering, how the plant was grown. We need to be familiar with, maybe was it grown in the ground in the nursery? Was it grown in a container? Size of the plant, guess what? Smaller plants establish faster, okay? As a gardener, 40 years I've lived in the same house. Guess what? Plant small. They get big, faster than you'll ever imagine, okay? And they establish faster. There's less chance of death. And when a little one dies, it's nowhere near as traumatic as when a big one dies, right? And then the species. Some species establish faster than others. All right? Plant establishment is the key. Post-plant watering is crucial. Here's just a little guide. Establishment time, 3 months to 2 years. Trees, 10 gallons of water per week per inch caliper. Caliper, that's the diameter of the trunk, about 6 inches up. So if it's a 1 inch caliper, how much does it need per week? 10 gallons. 10 gallons. That's not a lot of water if you look at it that way. That's 2 5-gallon buckets. For you math majors out there. Medium-sized shrub, 10 gallons per week. Flower bed, 5 gallons to 10 per 10 square feet per week. All right, lawn. You see what I'm doing here, subliminal, 15 to 30 gallons per 10 square feet is what a lawn needs to become established. It's a high use plant. So when's the best time to plant? Now, if you take the class, we have an entire night spent the best time for planting. Okay. When can you plant? You can plant anytime, provided that you know what you're doing. When would be the best time? Well, it depends on whose perspective. From the plant's perspective, best time is to plant in the fall, from a plant physiological perspective. However, from a human perspective, when's the best time to plant? Today. April, right? You've been all cooped up. February comes. I'm going down to Big Bloomers Flower Farm, buying hundreds of plants. You know, I'm coming over here to the plant cart at the Arboretum, grabbing things because from a psychological perspective, it's the very best time. But from a physiological perspective, it's not. And we don't have time to explain that right now, so I'm just making you think about it. So that's all I want to tell you about planting. All right? If you have questions about planting during the Q&A, happy to expound and expand. But there were some main points that I wanted to make sure you took away with you, because if you remember to do those things, you'll be successful. All right? So, pruning. 30 years ago, Mark, it may have been even almost 40 years ago now, I did a survey in Wake County, asked people why they pruned. Number one answer, 100 people. What was it? Because you're supposed to. Guys, if you do not take a pair of pruners to a plant unless you have a good reason to do so. All right? Yes, but is size control a good reason? Yes, if it's too big for the space. Shame on you for putting a plant in a place that it's going to grow too big, but pruning is one possible solution. So let's talk pruning. Pruning defined, anytime you remove plant parts, you're pruning. If you harvest a peach tree, you're pruning. Interesting. All right? Anytime if you're propagating a plant, taking cuttings, you're pruning. Okay? You need to always be thinking about pruning the proper way, even if it's not necessarily for size control or shaping or that type of thing. Okay? Pruning. And my next door neighbor is a retired carpenter, contractor, and for years, we've been neighbors for 30 years, and for years he always laughed at my Black & Decker circular saw. And I said, why are you laughing at that? He says, first you got to start with the best tool. He said, a Black & Decker circular saw is not the best tool. And I just called him a carpentry snob. He said, you need a Milwaukee. Well, guess what I have now? A Milwaukee. You know what? If you know what you're doing, then tools matter. You hear what I said? If you go out and buy the best tool, pruning tool, but you don't know how to prune, that tool will do just as much damage as a poor pruning tool. Okay, so it's really important, but tools are important. Tools are very important. Knives, hand pruners, pruning saws. One thing I'll tell you about a pruning saw, be careful, they're incredibly sharp. They can be very small. They're one of the best tools. And just remember, the pruning saw always cuts on the pull stroke. It does not typically cut well on the forward stroke. It's not like a carpentry saw, all right? You can go out and try to cut a branch off and you'll sweat and you lose weight and it won't cut. You have to, on the pull stroke. Why would they design a saw like that? You guys be quiet over there. Okay? Because people don't stay on the ground when they prune. They climb trees, they got on ladders, and if you're pruning on the push stroke, you're falling out of the tree, you're falling off the ladder. You need a good center of gravity, and you pull that pruner toward yourself. It was a genius way that they invented this. They came up with that idea. Okay, so that's all I want to say about that. Let's talk about hand pruners. You got two basic types of hand pruners. One, the bypass pruner, and two, the anvil pruner. On the right-hand side, the bypass, like a scissor, where one blade bypasses the other. The top blade is the cutting blade. The lower blade is what we call the cradle. You put the branch in the cradle, and this scissor cuts. That's bypass. Okay, on the left, anvil. Put a big giant red X through the anvil. Okay, the anvil, the blade on the top is the cutting blade, and then it comes down on a flat surface. Okay? Take a knife in your kitchen and just start hitting a flat surface. Over time, what happens? Okay, it gets dull, it gets damaged. Not only that, is if you notice this, the width of the lower blade is going to determine where on the branch you're going to be able to place the cutting blade. All right? And I've got all kinds of diagrams and everything I could show you about how this leaves more pruned material that has no future. That's what I call it. A stub is what we used to call it. Now I call it pruned material with no future. right? It's just going to sit there. It's not going to sprout. And oftentimes the literature says it attracts diseases and insects and things like that. And third, it's kind of unsightly, all right? So you want to just put in your mind, I need a bypass pruner. That's how it works, bypass pruner, all right? Here's why. Prune, you always, with your bypass pruner, you want to prune with the cradle facing away from the main branch, all right? I know this may sound a little confusing, but there's your main branch, all right? This is the wrong way to do it. You see that I have the cradle facing the main branch. So the cutting blade is about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch outside of where you want to cut. So what happens when you cut? Look what's left, okay? Branch left with no potential. This is not going to do anything but just sit there and die back and potentially could attract disease. I think it just looks crappy, all right? No, you want to put the blade, you want the cradle to face away from the branch, the main branch that you're pruning on. So when you prune, that's what you get. You get a clean cut and you don't leave that stub. Make sense? Okay, now those of you who are right-handed are thinking, okay, that's great on the right-hand side of the shrub. But I'm gonna have to turn it this way, or maybe walk around this way. Or if you buy the right kind of pruner, you can buy a right-handed pruner and a left-handed pruner, and then you can go all over the place. Just saying. Second, tool, and then I started talking about technique, okay? Pruning cuts, the importance of pruning cuts, technique. 2 main cuts, okay? First of all, we got 2 categories. Selective, what does that imply? Thinking, okay? Non-selective, what does that imply? Not thinking, all right? Take a pair of hedge trimmers. I have a big one, and it's gas powered, and I can do countless hours of non-selective pruning where I shave plants all day long, right? There's a place for that. You'll have to take the class in order to understand why. Okay. But let's talk 2 basic selective pruning cuts. These are the pruning cuts that predominate my gardening life. Okay. One's called heading back. When you do a heading back cut, you cut above an outward facing bud. By the way, this little schematic diagram, there's your main stem, there's the branch. These little blue guys are the buds. Okay, so you've got a bud facing inward, outward, outward. And so I've chosen to prune using a heading back cut here, because guys, remember, for every pruning cut you make, it elicits a growth response. So if I cut here, what is going to be the response? Well, if we went through the whole biological science of apical dominance and how the chemistry of the plant, et cetera, this bud's going to be the first one to go, right? So if I cut above an inward-facing bud, what's going to happen? This guy is going to go to the inside of the shrub, and now you have crossing limbs. So you have to start thinking architecture when you're pruning. So a heading back cut is above an outward-facing bud. All right, the second kind, and this is my favorite. By the way, heading back cuts should be selective and used sparingly, right? The second type is something called thinning, AKA drop crotching. Okay, this always raises an eyebrow, okay? Especially when you're 18 to 22 years old and you're in your first gardening class, and I say it's time to do some drop crotching, and they all, look at me. So we've changed that to thinning, all right? But the drop crotching cut, oh, by the way, anytime one branch meets another, what do we call that unit? It's called a crotch. Where 2 branches meet, that's called a crotch. So if we're dropping a crotch, we are pruning back to the crotch, okay? There's the red, see the red line? We've drop crotched. What kind of growth response are we going to get when you drop crotch? None. No, you will get growth response, but it'll be distributed almost evenly throughout the rest of the region of where you pruned. At the end of the day, if you've drop crotched 90% and headed back 10%, would a person driving up looking at that shrub know that you pruned it? No, it wouldn't be evident. Can you do size control? You can. Can you shape or take care of wild hairs, as I call them? Absolutely. So I like to start doing all my thinning first, and then I'll touch it up with some heading back cuts. It's the least invasive type of pruning. There's my first alarm. I have 10 minutes. Holy crow. All right, so heading back. There's the heading back cut. Outward facing bud, boom, I cut it. Here's the drop crotching. Back to where one branch meets another, boom, that's it. Those are the 2. And you can get a lot of pruning done that way, selective, okay? When should I prune? Well, we've got some terms. I've got to go through this real quick. Okay? Okay, whenever something flowers, what does that mean? That means the buds open. Oh, my dogwood's flowering. That means the buds have opened, displaying the flowers. That's one stage of life in a plant. Second, flush. This one is often confused. A flush is a vegetative growth spurt, like you see in the slide. It's when vegetation grows. It's a vegetative spurt of growth. That's called a flush, a growth flush. Contrary to popular belief, trees, shrubs, plants don't flush continuously through the year. They have periods of flushing. They typically flush in the spring. Sometimes you'll get a second flush, but that's the term we use. And third, set buds. Set buds actually means that on the plant, it's producing buds that are going to flower, all right? So we got 3 stages. All right, so now all we have to do is marry these stages with the kinds of plants we have and we'll know when to prune. Case in point, plants that flower in the spring, azaleas, rhododendrons, spring flowering plants, what do they do first? They flower. First thing, the buds open. Azalea, buds are there, they open. That's the first thing. What's the second thing they do? Then they flush after they finish flowering, and then they set buds. When do azaleas set buds? Right now. Okay, so you shouldn't be pruning your azaleas right now, or you shouldn't be pruning them this September or October, or, listen, you shouldn't be pruning them in February and March, because if you are, what are you pruning off? Next year's flower buds. So flower, flush, and then set buds. Azaleas, rhododendrons as examples. So when do we prune? Prune after flowering, or prune before flushing. I have a bumper sticker, prune before flushing. People really don't understand what I'm talking about. So here's our famous native oak leaf hydrangea. Guess what? It's a spring flowering plant, flowers on last year's wood. So this is an example of a tree, of a plant that you would prune after it flowers, right before it flushes, because when you prune after it flowers, what's it going to do? It's going to flush. All right, summer flowering, crepe myrtles. Okay, they flush first in the spring. Crepe myrtle flushes, then it sets buds, then it flowers. So when do you prune it? We don't prune after it flowers because that would be like September, October. And if we prune it then, we might stimulate a growth response that can't get ready for the winter. So rather than prune after flowering, when do we prune? Prune before flushing. So guess what? No matter what kind of plant it is, in your head, you should have a mantra. Prune before flushing. Prune before flushing. Summer flowering, you're going to prune in February, March. Spring flowering, you're going to prune after they flower, before they flush in the mid to late spring. Simple as that. So, hydrangea. Here's smooth hydrangea. Guess what? It is a later spring flowering plant that flowers on this year's growth. So this one you prune before flushing. When is that? February, March. Same genus, 2 different plants. One gets pruned after it flowers in the late spring. The other one gets pruned in the early spring. Whew. 6 minutes to talk pest management, right? I can do it. Just listen. Okay. Did you know that plants that are thriving are more resistant to pests? You know, my doctor tells me the healthier I am, okay, the more resistant I'm going to be to disease and insects. Excuse me, not insects. Diseases and infirmities. All right, that's called preventative health care. We need to practice preventative health care. We need to maintain a high number of nectar-bearing plants. What does this have to do with pest management? What it has to do with pest management is it creates a balance in the ecosystem of insects where you improve pollination and fruiting. Wait a minute, what happened to pests? And it increases the number of predatory and parasitic insects in the environment. Okay? Just by creating a pollinator garden, people always say, oh, I'm going to do a pollinator garden. I always ask why, and they always talk about pollinating and food. How about saying, because I want to increase the ecological balance of predatory insects to pest insects. Sounds like a cool idea. And then try to avoid broad spectrum pesticides that kill lots of things. All right, we don't have time to get into that right now. So guess what? First, know your plant. I get a lot of phone calls. People call up. They say, hey, listen, I got this plant. The leaves are turning yellow. So what's the plant? It's green. That's like me going to the doctor saying, doctor, I hurt. Well, where? Around here somewhere. Then I say, I think it's my elbow. Okay, and then he goes, well, what have you been doing? What do you mean, what have I been doing? I get mad when my doctor asks me all these questions about my lifestyle. Give me something for my elbow. You got to know your plant. If you don't know your plant, how do you know what it's susceptible to or resistant to? Know your pest. Gosh, we just don't know our pests. Know the biology of the pest. You can eliminate over half the insect pests that you might have on a plant just by knowing the pests. Well, that one doesn't infect this. And did you know what kind of a mouthpart these little yellow aphids have? If you knew how they infected, then you could start thinking about how you might manage it. By the way, they have little hypodermic needles that go in and suck the juices out of the leaves, right? So if somebody ever tells you, bless you, somebody ever tells you to use a pesticide that you can spray on, and then when the pest comes, it'll kill it, it won't kill aphids because they take that little stylet and they go right through into the leaf and they start sucking the juices and they laugh because all the stomach poison around them is like, I'm not eating you. See, so you've used the wrong material. Okay, strategies. First of all, how about this one? Years ago, 1950s, almost into the mid-70s, the way we did pest management was if we saw an aphid, we nuked the garden. And we called it pest control. Okay? All of a sudden, someone realized that actually, in agriculture and in home gardening, we could tolerate a certain level of infection. Anybody here ever have athlete's foot? I suffered through athlete's foot in my young years. Okay? If it wasn't bad, I never did anything about it. I had a threshold, and if it wasn't burning and bothering me, I would walk around with athlete's foot. I know that's a horrible illustration, but I'm telling the truth. At one point, it got so bad that it became important to me, and then I treated it. Okay, so that's what happened back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They started thinking, well, in agriculture, we don't have to spray right away because a certain crop can handle a certain number of insect pests or disease infections without affecting yield. And so let's wait before we apply the management practice. That turned into something called integrated pest management. So it went from pest control to pest management. Okay, that means you look at a bug in your garden, you go, I'm okay, you're okay. Until there's too many of you, then you're not okay, right? That's really it. So how do we approach that? Well, first of all, keep it clean, right? Keep it clean. Sanitation, good gardening practices where you dispose of things. I know there's a disease on hydrangeas where if you rake up all the leaves at the end of the year and you dispose of them properly, compost them, you're reducing the chance for infection. There are cultural things that you can do. Don't plant that near this, okay? Hey, how about this one? Remove the pest with your hand. Cut off the infected branch. Those are cultural management practices. Oh, mechanical. That's where, you put the little toilet paper roll around your little garden transplant so the cutworms don't come and cut it. That's a physical barrier. That's a mechanical control. Oh, then there's biological, but I already told you the best way to do biological control is to improve your pollinators so that you get a better balance of good insects, bad insects, and the next thing you know, you have predatory wasps out taking care of some of the insects that you have. And if you think that a praying mantis is the answer to all your problems, it is not. Praying mantis are, first of all, they think they're way better than they are. Right? They'll attack hummingbirds. What's with that? Okay. Not only that is they are lazy. Right? They're like a hunter in a deer stand. I didn't mean to imply you hunters out there that you're lazy, but it's like they're waiting for an insect to come by so they can grab it. Okay, they don't go out hunting. All right, and so if you have praying mantis, great, but don't buy them and put them in your garden. Just create a garden where they'll come naturally. Same with ladybug beetles. If you think you can keep all your ladybug beetles that you bought in your yard, right, then you have to put up a ladybug fence. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, and then biorational chemicals. That's a new term. I kind of laughed when I saw that. Biorational chemicals. These are. Well, we have go into a long discussion about chemicals. There's a word that needs about an hour, Mark, if you don't mind. But biorational means these are chemicals that are plant derived, perhaps, that have been listed as being better. But we got to know our insects. Okay, we got to know the difference between a whitefly, a mealybug, scale, and spider mite. Don't they all look disgusting? They really do. And then we've got cabbage loopers, potato beetles, earwigs, Japanese beetles. We got to learn all their life cycles. Typically, remember this, they all like to reproduce a lot. And they all like to eat a lot. Okay, so integrated pest management. How many bad bugs can a plant or garden tolerate before your yield is affected or it's not acceptable to you as a gardener, okay? In the agricultural world, guess what happens here? Okay, there are actually scouts that go out into the field and they count white flies or their eggs per square centimeter. Wouldn't you want that job? I'm a scout. I'm an IPM scout, and they go out. College students on internships do it a lot. All right, but it's great because they have charts that tell you exactly how many per square centimeter before you need to do some kind of management practice. So you say, how do I translate that into my own backyard garden? Okay, well, you have to come up with a home gardener's threshold, and it's personal. It's personal. My mom, we had a backyard garden. I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, and everybody had a backyard garden. Not everybody, quote unquote. Anyway, my mom planted 1.5 rows of tomatoes. I remember being 11, I asked my mom, why do you plant 1.5 rows? And she says, well, the row is for the family, neighbors, friends, giveaways, that kind of thing. She said, the half is for the bugs. So I'm 11. What was my next question? How do the bugs know to go? Guess what? My mom in the 1960s was practicing integrated pest management in her own backyard because she was willing to allow a certain degree of infection to occur that she was okay that tomatoes would fail. She was not of the ilk to pull out the big guns when she saw the first tomato hornworm. That's integrated pest management. And that's the message about pest management I wanted to come across. And so in conclusion, let's make sure if you're going to use any kind of pesticide, I don't care if it's organic, biorational, whatever it might be, there are 2 things you need to be concerned about as a gardener. And guess what? Those of you who own homes or live in places that need to clean things, you need to be concerned about this relative to the cleaning materials you have underneath your sink, whether you have children or not. Anyway, it's called an LD50. The 2 things you need to be concerned about with chemicals is 1, how much of it does it take to kill you? 2, how long does it stick around? Toxicity and residual life. And research those 2 things, okay? I don't have time to talk about how the USDA actually bases a lot of their findings on toxicity and on residual life, okay? DDT was taken off the market not because it's toxic. You can bathe in it, you'll be fine, okay? No, it's that it builds up in the food chain, and all of a sudden, eagles' eggs were not secure enough for eagle babies. That's why DDT was taken off the market. LD50 is a chemical toxicity measured in milligrams a kilogram per body weight. I'm going to finish with this because I want to leave you with, So here we go. Okay, the lower the LD50, the more toxic. Below 500 is considered toxic. 500 is poisonous, if you will. Here we go. There we go. Heroin, 22. Oh, okay. Nicotine, careful, 50. Did you know the most toxic pesticide that we use in our gardens, that can be used in our gardens, is 100% organic? Another discussion for another day, okay? And has an LD50 of 50. It's a serious thing, and it's organic. Rotenone, which is organic, has 132, and if it gets in the water, it kills fish. 7, it's not organic, it's a synthetic, it's 80, and guess what? If it hits bees, they're dead. Malathion, another synthetic chemical pesticide, 1375, the number keeps going up. Aspirin, 200. Aspirin. Caffeine, 200. Okay, you're starting to squirm in your seats, I hear you. Ibuprofen, 700. Pyrethrum, that's an organic contact insecticide, 1,500, and it also kills bees on contact. Okay, 1 take-home message is just because it's organic doesn't mean it's not dangerous to us or the environment. Okay, Roundup, 4,300. I'm not going there. I just put it up there. Table salt, 3,000. Got 1 more. Neem oil, greater than 4,000, it's 100% organic. Neem oil. Remember, the lower the LD50, the more toxic. So neem oil is like, you can soak your toes in it. Okay? Last one, gasoline, 14,000. Tastes horrible. Vitamin C, 11,900. Vitamin C is more toxic than gasoline. Okay? CBD, 980. Oh, now I've got your attention. THC, now I've really got your attention. 1270. Solanine, that's what's in tomatoes and in the nightshade family, 590. Capsaicin, that's the hot stuff in the peppers, 48. So to conclude my presentation and turn it over, how many ghost peppers does it take to kill you? Just in case you were wondering, right? At 5 milligrams of capsaicin per pepper, and you weighed 190 pounds, excuse me, I weigh 190 pounds. I wish I weighed 190 pounds. That means I'd have to eat 445 ghost peppers to die. Guess what? No one dies from ghost pepper poisoning because I can't get one past my mouth. So guys, perspective, science, and the last slide I have for you is get on the JC Raulston website, and hopefully I'll see you either virtually or in face-to-face on September 11th for that 6-week class on planting and pruning. Thanks for your attention.